Have you ever felt an inexplicable chill in someone's presence? Not the kind that comes from fear of physical harm, but a subtle, almost invisible disturbance, as if something beneath the surface of their smile was reaching out to you in a way you couldn't quite name. You laugh at their joke, you respond politely, but deep in your body there's a quiet alarm ringing. Carl Jung, one of history's most brilliant psychologists, dedicated decades of his life to understanding such invisible dynamics. And in doing so, he uncovered a chilling truth. Some of the most dangerous signals in human relationships do not come from raised voices, threats, or open hostility. They emerge in silence, wrapped in charm, are often mistaken for harmlessness. This signal, Jung noted, is rarely recognized by the conscious mind. Our intellect might dismiss it as overthinking, but our primal instincts detect it instantly. This is why, despite feeling uncomfortable, many people ignore it only to later find themselves entangled in a psychological trap. Ancient wisdom across cultures has warned about such people for centuries. Shamans, monks, and elders spoke of those who carry the storm inside them. Jung's genius was in articulating this in precise psychological terms. The silent predator. Shadow projection. One of the most dangerous psychological mechanisms Jung identified was shadow projection. Imagine this. You are conversing with someone when suddenly they begin to accuse you of thoughts, intentions, or motives you never had. They may imply that you are manipulative, selfish, envious, or cruel, even though nothing you've said or done supports their claim. At that moment, they are not truly responding to you. They are reacting to a distorted image. They have unconsciously created an image onto which they have projected their own denied traits. The shadow, in Jungian psychology, is the collection of qualities, impulses, and emotions that a person refuses to acknowledge in themselves. These are not necessarily evil traits. They may simply be aspects that contradict the person's self-image. A gentle, agreeable person may repress their natural anger. A moralist may repress their selfish desires. A caregiver may repress their exhaustion and resentment. But here's the danger. Repressed traits don't disappear. They gather power in the unconscious, waiting for an outlet. And when the pressure becomes too great, the psyche finds a way to discharge it by projecting it onto someone else. When this happens, the projector genuinely believes they are seeing reality. In their eyes, you are the envious one, the manipulative one, the dishonest one. They are not consciously lying. They are locked in a distorted perception that is immune to logic, evidence, or dialogue. Why it's so dangerous? The danger is not only that the person misperceives you, it's that they can convince others of their false perception. People who project heavily are often persuasive because they speak with complete certainty. They do not wonder if you might be manipulative, they declare it as fact. And in the social arena, conviction often carries more weight than truth. Ancient traditions understood this. In Buddhism, there is the metaphor of the darkened mirror, which reflects one's own impurities as if they belong to another. In Christianity, there is the warning about the beam in your own eye while pointing to the speck in someone else's. Contemporary neuroscience now confirms Jung's insight. The brain filters reality to confirm what it already believes. In the case of massive shadow projection, that filter doesn't just distort reality, it replaces it. Recognizing the signal, so how do you identify this phenomenon in real life? It often reveals itself through a disconnect. What the person says about you simply doesn't match your internal reality. They describe your motives, emotions, or actions in ways that feel alien to your actual experience. You might think, where is this coming from? This isn't me. The crucial thing to understand is that you are witnessing the external battlefield of an internal war. They are fighting against parts of themselves they cannot accept, and you have been involuntarily drafted as the opponent in their mind. The most dangerous disguise, moral superiority. Jung warned that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but he would have added, and driven by those who believe they are unquestionably good. This leads us to another deadly psychological state, psychic inflation. Unlike simple arrogance, which is usually obvious, psychic inflation is far more subtle and dangerous. It happens when a person's ego identifies with an archetype, the savior, the enlightened one, the moral guardian. They no longer see themselves as a flawed human being. They see themselves as a living embodiment of divine truth or moral perfection. This kind of person may be a spiritual leader, activist, teacher, healer, or simply a friend who believes they are always right for the right reasons. The danger is that their moral certainty makes them incapable of self-doubt. And unlike the humble wise men of history, who acknowledge the limits of their understanding, the inflated ego feels no such humility. Ancient mystics warned of this long before psychology existed. Meister Eckhart called it the most subtle trap on the spiritual path. Zen masters spoke of Zen sickness, where the student mistakes a glimpse of raw truth for ultimate enlightenment. Sufi mystics spoke of the veil of light, more dangerous than the veil of darkness, because it blinds the person with their own sense of holiness. The unmistakable sign of psychic inflation is absolute certainty in one's own motives. No matter the harm they cause, they believe it is justified, even righteous. And this certainty makes them immune to feedback, correction, or reality itself. What to do when you see it, when you encounter either massive shadow projection or psychic inflation? Withdraw. Not with anger, not with an attempt to prove them wrong, but with the clarity that you are dealing with a perceptual distortion you cannot fix. Your best defense is to refuse to become the stage for their unconscious drama. Protect your boundaries, step out of the game, and allow the lion to sleep far away from you. As Jung himself would say, the greatest danger in the world is not the evil in others, but the evil we fail to see in ourselves, for that is the evil we will inevitably see everywhere else. They do not contemplate the possibility of error, because, in their mind, they are not expressing personal opinions, but universal truths. To them, their words carry the weight of eternal principles. This is precisely what makes such individuals dangerous. Their absolute conviction transforms dialogue into doctrine. Jung noted that leaders suffering from severe psychic inflation often attract deeply devoted followers, not despite their arrogance, but because of the certainty they radiate. In a world filled with uncertainty, people crave figures who speak with unshakable authority. This craving for definitive answers can lead us into the arms of those whose self-assurance is not rooted in wisdom, but in identification with something they believe to be beyond themselves. The Chilean psychologist Claudio Naranjo, a student of both psychology and spiritual traditions, pointed out that the spiritual ego is the most refined and difficult form of ego to detect. An ordinary ego says, "I am important." An inflated spiritual ego says, "I am the voice of the supreme good." The latter is far more insidious because it cloaks itself in moral or spiritual authority, disarming criticism. If someone truly believes they are the embodiment of divine will, every disagreement becomes in their perception an attack not on them, but on the very truth itself. This subtle shift is why people can become enthralled by dangerous individuals who seem, on the surface, to be noble or enlightened. Recognizing psychic inflation requires careful observation. The key is in their reaction to criticism or disagreement. The person whose ego is inflated with archetypal identification will not process questioning as useful feedback. Instead, they perceive it as heresy. Opposition is not framed as a difference in perspective, but as resistance to the ultimate good they claim to represent. Jung warned that such a psychological state endangers not only those who follow, but the inflated individual themselves. When the small, limited human ego fuses with vast transpersonal contents, the psyche is subjected to unbearable tension, a tension that demands eventual collapse. The higher the inflation, the more catastrophic the fall when denied aspects of the self inevitably force their way to the surface. There is something profoundly unsettling about those who seem to show you exactly what you want to see, in every circumstance. Jung discovered a recurring pattern. Certain individuals achieve a level of social adaptation so perfect that it erases all rough edges, contradictions, and spontaneous humanity. He called this the persona, borrowing the term from the masks of Greek theater. At its core, the persona is a necessary social tool, the part of ourselves we present to the world. But total identification with the persona signals a complete dissociation between the external image and the inner being. It means authenticity has been sacrificed at the altar of social acceptance. The mask becomes so convincing that even the wearer forgets it is a mask. As the poet Fernando Pessoa expressed, the danger is not in the mask, but in forgetting that it is a mask. Eastern contemplative traditions have echoed this for centuries. In Zen Buddhism, there is the idea of the original face before birth, a metaphor for our essential, unconditioned self. A telling warning sign appears when you sense artificiality in someone's interactions, even when their behavior is flawless. They always know the right words, the right gestures, the socially acceptable emotional response, but it all feels rehearsed. There is no unpredictability, no healthy contradictions that signal genuine humanity. As Jungian analyst James Hollis noted, excessive perfection in social adaptation often indicates an inner life that is proportionally empty. This is not harmless. Behind the mask, something is missing, and nature abhors a vacuum. Modern neuroscience sheds light on why we notice this dissonance. Our brains are wired with mirror neurons that pick up subtle incongruities between another person's words, expressions, and body language. When someone's outer presentation is utterly divorced from their inner reality, these neurons fire off a silent alarm. We experience it as an inexplicable unease or quiet distrust. This instinct is ancient, a survival mechanism alerting us to predators, even when they smile. The true danger lies in what the perfected persona conceals. Psychic energy is not infinite. Whatever is repressed does not vanish. It sinks into the unconscious, building into what Jung called the shadow, the sum of everything we reject or deny in ourselves. The more rigid and immaculate the persona, the more chaotic and destructive the shadow becomes. When it finally erupts, it does so with all the force of years of repression. The harmless figure, once idealized, may reveal depths of cruelty, manipulation, or instability no one anticipated. Their shadow will be, when it inevitably emerges. Marie-Louise von Franz, a close collaborator of Jung, observed that those who present a perfect social adaptation often experience episodes of shadow BS. Eruption. Moments where all the repressed energy explodes in unpredictable and potentially destructive ways. This dynamic explains why, frequently, the apparently most perfect people are capable of surprisingly destructive acts. Complete identification with the social persona represents, in Jung's words, a betrayal of the self, an abandonment of authentic individuality in favor of an artificial construction, and like all deep betrayal, it eventually takes its psychological toll. Imagine you are conversing with someone, and, suddenly, you perceive a subtle but profound change, the same person physically, but something fundamental has changed in their gaze, in their energy, in the quality of their presence, as if something ancient and transpersonal were manifesting through them. This unsettling experience, which many traditional cultures recognized as a form of possession, was conceptualized by Jung as archetypal possession, perhaps the most alarming sign we can detect in another human being. Archetypes, according to Jung, are primordial patterns of the human collective psyche, structuring forces of our experience that contain both luminous and shadowy aspects. When an archetype possesses a person's consciousness, they lose their individuality and become a channel for transpersonal energies that far exceed their capacity for integration. Shamanic traditions of various cultures perfectly understood this phenomenon. Anthropologist Mircea Eliade documented how shamans differentiated between controlled states of channeling and dangerous states of possession, where individual identity was completely subsumed. Christian mysticism spoke of discernment of spirits as the essential ability to distinguish beneficial psychic influences from those potentially destructive. The warning sign arises when you perceive that someone has lost normal psychological flexibility, becoming rigidly identified with a single archetypal pattern. It may be the unquestionable savior, the relentless warrior, the perpetual victim, the infallible judge. The specific archetype matters less than the complete identification with it. Revealing indicators include a strange glow in the eyes, a monolithic quality in speech, and a peculiar feeling that the person is no longer completely present in the ordinary sense. As Jungian analyst Robert Moore pointed out, you are not relating to a complete human personality, but to an archetypal fragment that has usurped control of consciousness. Modern neuropsychology has identified altered states of consciousness where certain brain areas associated with personal identity show reduced activity, while areas linked to transpersonal experiences intensely activated. These states, valuable in controlled ritual contexts, can be extremely dangerous when they occur spontaneously without the appropriate container. What is particularly alarming is that the person possessed by an archetype experiences an extraordinary sense of certainty and purpose. The ambiguity of ordinary consciousness disappears, replaced by an absolute conviction that can be extremely persuasive to others. Jung observed how political and religious leaders in states of archetypal possession could catalyze mass movements precisely because of this quality of superhuman certainty. The fundamental danger lies in the fact that archetypes, as primordial patterns of the collective unconscious, contain extreme polarities. The same archetype of the Savior contains both the potential for redemptive compassion and destructive fanaticism. When a person becomes completely identified with an archetype, they will inevitably manifest its darkest aspects, often without any awareness of the contradiction. Jung documented numerous cases where individuals possessed by archetypes committed acts completely contrary to their conscious values, later experiencing partial amnesia or extreme rationalization. Archetypal possession represents the temporary loss of the capacity for self-reflection, precisely what makes us human. There is a psychological phenomenon so disturbing that, when you recognize it in someone, you understand that you are witnessing a genuine tragedy in development. Jung called it the compulsion to repeat an unconscious pattern where the person obsessively recreates the same painful situations, as if trapped in an invisible labyrinth from which they cannot escape. This signal, when we clearly detect it in another, warns us that we are facing an extraordinary danger being involved in a psychological drama that does not belong to us. What is truly alarming about the compulsion to repeat is its automatic and unconscious quality. The person is not consciously or maliciously choosing to recreate destructive patterns. They are responding to deep psychic forces that operate completely outside their consciousness. As psychoanalyst Christopher Bollas expressed, they are unthought knowns, formative experiences so early or traumatic that they were never cognitively processed, but organize all subsequent experience. Spiritual traditions have recognized this phenomenon for millennia. The Buddhist concept of karma originally did not refer to a cosmic system of reward and punishment, but precisely to these patterns of conditioning that lead us to recreate similar circumstances over and over again. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, the idea of original sin can be interpreted psychologically as these unconscious patterns that we inherit and perpetuate without conscious choice. The revealing side appears when you observe someone who consistently ends up in the same painful situations with different people, but following an amazingly similar script. Even more disturbing, the person seems sincerely surprised each time the pattern is repeated, as if they were a victim of destiny instead of the unconscious architect of their own recurring experience. Contemporary neuroscience has discovered a biological basis for this phenomenon. Early experiences, especially traumatic ones, literally create neural pathways that become routes of least resistance for information processing. The brain develops a neurological expectation that unconsciously seeks to confirm its pre-existing models of the world, even when these models produce suffering. The most dangerous aspect is that people trapped in unconscious repetition compulsions unconsciously try to recruit others to play roles in their unresolved internal drama. As psychoanalyst Donald Kaust pointed out, unprocessed trauma demands to be staged. Without realizing it, we can find ourselves playing a role in a story that began long before we met this person. Jung observed a fascinating phenomenon. The more unconscious the compulsion to repeat, the more it seems to manifest as synchronicities or significant coincidences in external life. The person unconsciously creates situations that replicate their unresolved internal dynamics, but experiences these events as if they were imposed by a cruel or unjust external fate. Jungian therapists identify this signal when they hear someone repeatedly narrate stories where they are always betrayed, abandoned, misunderstood, or victimized in surprisingly similar ways. As Marie-Louise von Franz expressed, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What is most disturbing is that the compulsion to repeat has an almost magnetic quality. The person trapped in these patterns unconsciously emits signals that attract precisely those who can help them recreate their original traumatic scenarios. Jung called this phenomenon negative synchronicity, the extraordinary ability of the unconscious to orchestrate encounters that perpetuate its unresolved patterns. If the signals we have explored reveal the deepest dangers, according to Jung, there is a transformative path that transcends these threats: the conscious integration of the shadow. This process represents the fundamental difference between psychologically dangerous people and those who have embarked on the journey towards psychic wholeness. The fascinating thing is that we can recognize this integration as clearly as we identify its absence, and when we perceive it in someone, we are facing the antithesis of psychological danger. Shadow integration does not mean moral perfection or the absence of negative aspects. On the contrary, it implies a humble and conscious recognition of one's own capacity for all the errors and darkness we observe in others. As Jung expressed, "I would rather be whole than good," a frequently misunderstood phrase that really points to the difference between authentic psychological integrity and a mask of perfection that hides dangerous internal divisions. Contemplative traditions have articulated this process for millennia, with different languages. Tibetan Buddhism speaks of transforming poison into medicine, recognizing and constructively using even the most difficult emotions and tendencies. Western alchemy, which fascinated Jung so much, symbolically represented this process as the transmutation of lead-rejected aspects into gold, integrated consciousness. The indicators of a person who has genuinely begun this process of integration are unmistakable: a peculiar combination of honesty about their own shadows and compassion towards the shadows of others. This person can admit their own problematic impulses and tendencies without excessive shame or self-indulgence, simply as aspects of the human condition that require constant awareness. Contemporary neuroscience has confirmed that this integration process has observable neurophysiological correlates. Researchers like Daniel Siegel have documented how the integration of previously dissociated aspects of experience literally creates new neural connections between different brain regions, particularly between primitive emotional centers and prefrontal areas associated with self-reflection. What is truly transformative about this process is that, paradoxically, consciously recognizing our most difficult aspects dramatically decreases the likelihood of unconsciously acting them out. As Jungian analyst Robert Johnson observed, "What we deny does not disappear, it simply emerges in forms over which we have less control." Conscious integration transforms potentially destructive psychic energy into available creative force. The person who has genuinely initiated this inner work exhibits a unique quality: the ability to see the world in shades of gray instead of absolute black and white. They do not rigidly divide between good and bad, recognizing universal human complexity. As Jungian psychologist James Hollis pointed out, psychological maturity begins when we abandon the fantasy of our absolute innocence. Authentic spiritual teachers throughout history have embodied this integration. The Dalai Lama can speak openly about his moments of anger. Teresa of Avila recognized her periods of spiritual aridity, and the Sufi mystic Rumi wrote poetically about his internal contradictions. This radical honesty contrasts dramatically with the artificial perfection of those who are dissociated from their shadows. The most reliable indicator of integration in process is a peculiar combination of genuine humility, not false modesty, and authentic authority, not authoritarianism. The integrated person does not need to proclaim their goodness or wisdom because they have transcended the need for an immaculate self-image. As Zen master Shunryu Suzuki expressed, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's there are few." Before we say goodbye, have you recognized any of these signals in important people in your life? Or, more importantly, have you detected aspects of these patterns in yourself? If this message touched your heart, write in the comments, "Consciousness is the first step towards transformation." Don't forget to share this content with those who need to awaken to the unconscious patterns in their relationships. Activate the bell and subscribe for more explorations of the fascinating Jungian universe.